Hey everyone, can you hear me all right? Okay, I'm sorry. I think there's been a problem with the audio. I'm not sure if you heard everything that was just playing or if you even saw it. But with that, we're gonna skip some of those sponsor intros. We apologize, but just because we want to get to the content, we're just gonna let our session leaders go ahead and kick it off. Kylie, do you want to give us a quick thank you to our Capital One sponsor before we get started?
Sure. Thank you so much. You guys, welcome to today's session. We are thrilled that you're here. Welcome to Denver Startup Week. If this is your first session of the day, welcome. If it's your third or fourth, we are so glad that you've stuck with us. This is our first ever Denver Startup Week, and we are just so excited about all of the great virtual content that we have been able to offer this year. So huge shout out to the product track sponsor, Capital One. Hopefully you guys can see a fun video from them later in the week. By joining some of the other product track sessions. But today we have the 3-week product sprint, and we're so excited that Kristina and Laura are here to share their wisdom and knowledge with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you guys for attending, and thanks for speaking.
Perfect. Thanks, Kylie. Give us 2 seconds to get set up and we'll get started. Okay. Can everybody see my slides? Kristina, can you see?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
So
today we're going to talk about the 3-week product sprint. We appreciate your time today, everybody, for coming and listening to us talk, and obviously Denver Startup Week for having us. We're really excited to share this information with y'all and have a little discussion at the end. So I'm Kristina Lins. I'm a product designer with Crafted. I'm a Colorado native. I grew up here. I went to college in DC at George Washington University, kind of bopped around for a little bit. And then 4 years ago, I landed back here in Denver. I started my design career as a freelancer, worked at a couple startups here in Denver. And then most recently, I was at Pivotal Cloud Foundry before I joined Crafted, which was about a year ago.
Perfect. And hi, everyone. My name is Laura Poatsy. I'm a product manager with Crafted. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I moved out here almost 2 years ago in October. I am a University of Richmond Spider. So if there are any spiders in the audience, go spiders. And I started my product management track back about 6 or 7 years ago, managing the mobile app at Lilly Pulitzer. And have kind of worked my way through to get to Crafted. I've been with Crafted almost 2 years as well. So just to give you guys, a quick background, since we've referenced Crafted a couple times, we are a consulting firm here in Denver. We were founded in 2017 by our founder, Adam Oliver, who came from Pivotal Labs. And we work with clients all the way from the growth stage all the way up to enterprise. And we really focus on iterative, high-value product delivery, but we also bring in an interesting twist with agile enablement. So we bring our clients along with us during the process of shipping software, so that you guys can learn the best practices along with us and are self-sufficient when we leave. So that's really our core, and you can see our values across the screen. We really aim to inspire teams as, with our best practices as you're working side by side with us in the trenches. Obviously deliver good products, and then finally measure outcomes, because we know that at the end of the day, that's where the money comes from. So enough about us. We are here to talk about the 3-week product sprint. And as a consulting firm, we work with a variety of different companies, as I mentioned. So lots of different sizes, lots of different industries, but more often than not, we see the same challenges across the board. And it really is these challenges that led us to come up with the 3-week product sprint. We needed a quick and efficient way to break down different problems and really build the software that our clients were asking us to build. So what do we say? First, this is something we can all relate with. Too many priorities and too little time. We want everything and we want it now, but we know that is impossible. And we have to pick the most important issues and priorities that are ultimately going to bring the most value to our business and our user. So the 3-week product sprint helps us figure out what priority is most important, most valuable, and gives us a quick and efficient way to work through that. Secondly, this kind of goes hand in hand, but not enough resources or correct ratios. So, if you have all the time in the world, you may not have enough resources. And we'll talk a little bit about the correct ratios when we talk about team structure a little bit later. But we want to make sure that you have the right balance of the right perspectives. And the 3-week product sprint is a really short amount of time to get those people and those resources to commit to this process. Thirdly, we see there's a difficulty of evaluating risk and a fear of shipping your product. And so, because people are afraid to ship what they've been working on, it just leads to bigger and bigger deployments and increases your risk. So you actually, as you the longer you wait to ship something, the more chance that there's going to be bugs or something's going to go wrong, and you're stuck with this huge deployment. So, the 3-week product sprint, again, breaks things down into small digestible pieces. We're big advocates of releasing early and often, and really just, it's easier to roll back or make a quick change to something small rather than a huge deployment. Next, we have analysis paralysis, and I'm sure as product managers and designers out there, again, something you can probably relate to, but you're given this problem or this product to work with, and the problems are endless, and you just kind of get wrapped up in yourself. So you're kind of like paralyzed because there's so much to do. We've seen clients that work on the same problem for years and really don't end up getting anywhere because the problems are too big. So this hopefully helps you to kind of break it down into digestible chunks that are easy to work through, and then you can go back to your next biggest chunk. Unclear metrics and goals. This is a really common one. I know, especially with growth stage startups, getting those analytics in place aren't always the top priority, and they fall to the wayside. But a lot of times teams don't have a clear goal in mind. They don't know what they're working towards. And so again, you're kind of just fumbling around, doing different features without a cohesive perspective. And so this again kind of focuses the team in and helps to really get some sort of solution in a quick amount of time. And finally, if you're working with your sales or your marketing teams, shiny object syndrome is probably something we all suffer from. We all want the next big thing and end up kind of deprioritizing maybe some of the foundational things, the really important things, to go chase that shiny object. So again, this kind of reprioritizes and allows you to focus on what's important for your product and your business. I'll ship it over to Kristina to talk through some of the benefits we see with the product sprint.
Yeah, so given all the challenges that Laura just brought up that we see a lot of our clients and at all stages experience, the 3-week product sprint has some specific benefits, especially over doing the typical 1-week product sprint. So 3 weeks it allows you to move at a more sustainable pace. It's more like a 5K, not a sprint, not quite a marathon, somewhere in between. Getting a whole week of people's attention especially when you have limited resources, if you're a small company, is just a huge effort for most people. So 3 weeks is more approachable. You get better outcomes, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And it's easier to repeat than that, like full on 1 week, all hands on deck kind of sprint. The next benefit that we see is that it really helps teams break down the overwhelming problems. So a lot of teams will just cycle on the same kind of issues, or they're just overwhelmed by all the things that they want to do or the size of a project that they're trying to take on. So this process really helps you hone in on the right size chunk of work, and especially will help you feed a realistic backlog in that respect. We like to think about it like Goldilocks, so not too big, not too small, but just right. The third thing is that it increases urgency and motivates the teams. So, if teams are stuck in a problem space, it can be really frustrating. We've seen a lot of burnout in the clients that we come in for. So, this kind of 3-week sprint really helps you get to prototypes really quickly. It gets people excited. Everyone feels involved and accomplished because everyone is part of the decision-making process. And it really kind of kicks things off in the right direction for a new project. The fourth one is that it lowers the risk of wasting time, money, and resources. So Laura mentioned this as well. These things are always in competition with each other. And, it's especially hard to get the attention of, key stakeholders for an entire week. But taking one team, just 3 weeks of exploration and testing on a known problem or project space that you've been kind of circling around for a while, it kind of lowers the risk as far as building the wrong thing or spending too much time and money going down the wrong path. And then the last one is the outcome with tangible deliverables. So we'll talk more about deliverables later, like I said, but you can get a lot more done, obviously, than you can in that 1 week, like really big push. And, we know that it's difficult to sell stakeholders on sprints or moving teams off of their existing work in order to do something like this. So instead of focusing on the ROI for the sprint, we talk about focusing on the learnings on investment and how this will open so many doors for the other things that other teams could possibly work on. Go ahead, Laura. Yep. So the overall purpose of the 3-week product sprint is to have an efficient and focused approach to gaining understanding of who your target users are, what they need, what you're building to solve their needs, and how you're going to do it.
Awesome. So now that we've kind of given you guys a high level overview, we're going to go into the tactics, actually tell you how to do it. I did forget to mention in the beginning of this, we will be doing a little Q&A at the end, about 10-ish minutes. So feel free to add your questions as we go through in the chat, and we will try and address as many of them as we possibly can. Awesome. So first things first, how do you prepare for a 3-week product sprint? You've listened to the talk, you're inspired, and now you want to go and do it. So what do you do first? First of all, you want to get the right people in the room. Starting with the right team structure, which we'll get to. We recommend what's called a balanced team, and we'll go through that in the next couple slides. And then making sure you have kind of stakeholder sponsors and making sure that your audience is relevant and you are surrounding your team with people and support that's going to empower you and your team during the whole 3-week process. Which leads into number 2, you need to sell your stakeholders on the process. So learning as much as you can about, what you're about to do in the next 3 weeks, and getting them involved. 3 weeks with one team that's, about 6 people, will really minimize a lot of your risk and have a ton of benefits. You'll see when we get through it, everything that you can accomplish when you're focused and commit to the process. But selling your stakeholders ahead of time on the process will not only allow them to empower you as you're going through, but they'll also help evangelize this to the rest of the company and support your findings. Number 3 is really hard to do, but you have to clear your calendar. In order to be efficient in the 3 weeks, you must commit and you must focus to your process. You need to be available for your team members. They need to be available to you, and you also need to be making sure that everything that you're doing is the highest priority. You'll hear us say a couple of times through the presentation that, during these 3 weeks, every day you accomplish what most teams will accomplish in a week. So, making sure you're really focused, you'll get the most value, most bang for your buck out of 3 weeks. Next, this goes back to helping sell your stakeholders, but create a rough sketch of your 3-week schedule for both you and your team. So we have kind of a template at the end of the presentation, but just aiming what you're going to try and accomplish by the end of every day, end of every week, end of every phase. We'll go through the phases, but we'll also kind of help time box you and allow your team to have something to shoot for. Additionally, we know a lot of teams are on kind of 2-week sprints, maybe even 4-week sprints sometimes, but three weeks is a little off kilter. So you want to plan for that asynchronous delivery to your normal sprint cycle. You may not be delivering the way that you typically are. You actually may even be completely separate from your normal sprint team, but just making sure that your team, your stakeholders are accounting for that velocity, and you'll be delivering in different ways. And by the end, you'll be right on track, but it may be slightly different than what is expected normally. And finally, knock out any pre-work that you might have. So, if you're going to want to do user interviews, especially, in this remote time, get access to userinterviews.com, pull your customer lists, do as much pre-work as you can ahead of time. That way you set you and your team up for success throughout the 3 weeks, and you're not going to waste any time. You can kind of go through the process quickly. So I mentioned a couple times about the proper team structure. We work in balanced teams. We actually even call ourselves a balanced team consultancy. And this is really important because it brings the 3 most important perspectives to the table. So getting this 3-person team in place will really, again, set you up for success. So the 3 perspectives are product. So this is a product manager, and they're really the voice of the business. They're the ones kind of communicating with stakeholders, bringing the business needs into the fold, making sure that what product is being built will serve the needs. They really, you'll see, make sure that the product is viable and will work. Next is design. So the designers are the voice of the user. They will represent the user in all discussions, all decisions. They're really leading a lot of the charge with generative interviews and understanding and empathizing with the user. So ultimately, they're responsible for making sure the product is desirable. Finally, engineering, and this can be, 1 to 4 people, but definitely have some sort of tech lead. The engineering is the voice of reason. So at all, from the very beginning, day 1, the engineers are really evaluating the technical feasibility of everything. So, we bring in our developers throughout the entire discovery process, making sure that they understand the background and what we're building and why, so that they can then figure out the how. Aside from this, so we call this kind of the balance team. This, you'll also hear us reference the working team. This is the core, and this is really, who will be in the trenches every day with each other in the 3 weeks. But there are other supporting teams like marketing, sales, that it will be important, and we'll show you different ways on how to do this, but to bring them along through the 3 weeks. But these three key roles are important for the success of the sprint. So the benefits of the balance team, I kind of went through this, but like I said, it represents the key multiple perspectives that you need at all points in the process. So right from the beginning, all 3 perspectives are collaborating. You're making trade-offs, for the business, for the designer, for the technical feasibility. And because you're right there, and, in non-COVID world, we'd be sitting at a table, all 3 together. But, in Zoom rooms or on the chats, ideally as co-located as you can be, we're collaborating all day long. So it eliminates any information gaps or silos. Everybody's in the loop, everybody's making the decisions, and you can just kind of make the decision and move on, rather than kind of waiting for a formal way to get any sort of feedback. You establish shorter feedback loops. Answers are garnered in real time rather than waiting for next Tuesday's meeting, next Tuesday's design review. If I have a question for a developer, I can just kind of pop over on Slack or yell across the table and just quickly ask them a question. That way I get my answer, they're looped in, and we can both move on. It's especially important in the 3-week sprint, just because time is so valuable. 3 weeks goes really quickly, and you'll see what we're trying to achieve in the 3 weeks, but you really don't want to lose time by waiting for an answer. And ultimately, it leads to a more efficient output, and a stronger product. So let's get into the phases, the nitty gritty of the 3-week product sprint. Kristina?
Yeah, so this is really the nuts and bolts of what we're doing through this sprint. As you can see, we're kind of listing the outcomes on the left and the kinds of, workshops or, tools that you can use to get to those outcomes on the right. I won't go through all of these in tons of detail. There's lots of resources out there, obviously, that will teach you how to write a user interview script or plan your research, things like that. And then also keep in mind that this isn't necessarily linear, especially in the first couple phases. A lot of this can be done in tandem. And then when we get to the part where we show you kind of how we lay out these phases over the course of the 3 weeks, that will kind of make a little bit more sense too. So obviously the first thing you want to do, a sprint of any length, you need to align on your goals, your anti-goals, your metrics, your risks, assumptions for the overall product with your stakeholders and your balance team. So that could look like a 1-day kickoff, it could look like half a day, kind of depends on the size and the number of people that you have involved. And then stakeholder interviews are incredibly important. That kind of helps you understand, where your CEO may envision this product going versus where your VP of product envisions the product going. So it really helps surface if there is any, if there are any places where everyone's not aligned, so that doesn't become an issue later. You can kind of deal with that up front. And then, we mentioned that for Crafted, it's really important to measure outcomes, putting in those metrics that you're going to want to measure for the success of this product, asking that question, how will we know that we succeeded? Really important from the get-go. So the next thing you'll do is formulate your strategy and set expectations. So, this could be part of your kickoff or something you do right after, but you'll sketch out the 3 weeks at a glance, which we'll show you in a minute. You'll do your stakeholder mapping workshop and establish your check-in cadence. So that means who wants to be informed of what throughout the product, or the project, so that they are kind of aware of what's happening with the project, and that can depend by stakeholder. And then determining your target proto-personas. So a proto-persona is an unvalidated idea of who your target user is, or users. So in phase 2 and 3, you'll refine the proto persona into a more validated persona. And that persona is going to serve you as your North Star for making decisions about the product throughout the sprint and beyond. And we'll, show you kind of how the entire team can build that empathy for the end user. So I'll just call out a couple of these things on the toolkit side. Empathy mapping, molecule mapping. These are just at their core problem statement workshops. So you're essentially answering who needs to do what and why. The other thing that's happening in phase 1 is the engineers are identifying technical spikes and doing POCs. So, I know a lot of times, engineers aren't involved this early on in a project, but it really helps you move a lot faster if they, are there from day one. If you're lucky enough to have a greenfield project, they can be going and researching common solutions to known problems, such as how are our users going to log in, some of those basics. Or if you're working on an existing code base, they can go and do some technical deep dives into that work. And then you'll start to plan for phase 2. So phase 2 is where you really get into talking to your users, doing that research. So you'll do research planning workshop, prep your script and your participants. This is where a lot of that prep work that you did prior to starting the sprint will come in really handy, because you'll just be off and running on userinterviews.com or whichever platform you're using. You'll have already gained an idea of who you want to interview, and then you'll be ready to set those up. Yep, so for phase 2, phase 2 is discover and empathize. So like I said, this is where you really get into it with your users. You want to build that empathy, understand their pain points, We do that by mostly generative interviews. Sometimes surveys make sense. There's a lot of different ways to reach out to people. And then another thing that I think a lot of teams either forget to do or do a little bit too late is a competitive analysis. So the key things to a competitive analysis that are really helpful in the sprint is understanding your market. You can evaluate what the design best practices are of what other companies are doing. You could even test things that your competitors are doing as a really low effort way to get some info from users before you even design anything. And then that will give you a lot of ideas for differentiating your product versus what's already out there. So also during this time, you want to synthesize your information really early, really often. You're going to try to find the themes that are coming up across, your different research, the different ways that you're doing your research. So that can look like affinity mapping, grouping stickies. Everybody loves grouping stickies. Bring in other people, subject matter experts. So maybe that's customer service, other people who talk to customers a lot, and they'll give you a lot of context. And then the other thing is we definitely include engineers here. They may not need to be in every synthesis session. We like to do it every day or every other day to make sure that the research doesn't get stale at any point. But having the engineers there is what really helps them build empathy. Oftentimes they'll listen to the interviews that we've recorded after the fact. And we've gotten really, really good feedback from our clients that we've done this with, that they've never been included in that part of the process, but really love it. So you'll start to prioritize your issues that are highest value and lowest risk. We found that doing a 2x2 with these two perspectives is what really helps you prioritize the most important things, especially since you're only in a 3-week sprint. There will only be time to prototype and test certain things. So you want to rank those in order of importance, and then also evaluate how risky they may be and how many assumptions or how big the assumptions are that you're making around your problems. You obviously want to spend more time and energy validating the riskier things or the things that you're not so sure about. So the next step, you can kind of do this in tandem also, but one of the next big things is to build your user journey. So we like to build out an entire flow. And obviously at this point, we haven't tested anything with users, anything specific. So this will, mold, change as you go, but we'll mock out the entire flow of the user journey, and then we'll kind of pick out which screens that we want to move forward with in phase 3. And then meanwhile, the engineers and your other supporting teams can be working on figuring out what technical dependencies you might have, understanding other pain points that the customer experiences in their journey, more like a service blueprint. And that can open up a lot of doors for other opportunities. You may not tackle any of those in this sprint, but you could in a future sprint. Cool. And then phase 3 is to ideate and validate. So as a designer, obviously this is my favorite. I get really excited about this, but you're going to start generating solutions as much as you can. I think some people, I'm sure, have heard of Crazy Eights. There's lots of fun and interesting brainstorming exercises and ideas out there that you can use with your team. We really like to bring in marketing, sales, customer service, some of those other teams that I mentioned. They all have tons of ideas and that are really beneficial to contributing at this point. I know design studio can sometimes be a contested thing. Stakeholders don't want to draw. Our clients are always very impressed by my inability to draw a straight line. So I like to just keep these low key, small. The idea is really just to get as many ideas out as you can and sort of throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. So after you do that, you'll start to build some quick and dirty mocks to show to your users. So this is not about how pretty it looks at this point. It's really about Are we working on the right features? Is this stuff going to deliver value? Do our users care about what we're making? And so that could be paper prototypes that you show internally. It could be low or medium fidelity wireframes that you start to test remotely with your users that you've recruited in phase 2. And then that feeds right into the validate and iterate. So as you go through these testing cycles, you keep what works and then you update the things that aren't working. And we like to push really hard in this phase. This is where a lot of your tangible outcomes for stakeholders come from. So we may be turning around wireframes or prototypes every day, right? So you test with a handful of people and then you make your changes, you test with another couple people. The more testing, whether that's internal or external you do, the further along you'll get in your roadmap and closer to actually delivering this product. So that just takes us right up to rinse and repeat. As you go through those testing phases, you're going to increase the fidelity of the mocks to get to those hi-fi mocks, something that you can actually have in production. But throughout the entire process, the other really important thing is that you involve the engineers in reviews. So we'll show pretty much every round of prototypes to the engineers. And that's kind of where the balanced team magic happens. And like Laura said, we all kind of make trade-offs and we're all bought into building this thing together. I want to know as early as possible if something that I'm considering designing for this user flow is going to completely blow up our scope. Doing those things early is what's going to speed you up. And then, also you have to remember that you'll never be 100% confident, no matter how much testing you do. You'll never have perfect data. And so at some point you really have to push yourself. The success of the sprint is going to be determined by, how far you can get this idea. And so, we're all really here at the end of the day to ship it. But if you trust the process, you'll get there. You'll know when you've done enough testing and when it's time to move on. So the next thing we'll just talk about really quickly is this 3 weeks at a glance. Obviously that this is gonna, mold and change as you go through each phase. But the point here is to show that, a week doesn't equal a phase. So, you can spend, it's easy to get stuck in that problem space, but if you have these like limited timelines, that kind of pushes you forward to the next phase. And, you can adjust this if you have 2 weeks or say you have 4 weeks, and then, it's really easy to kind of rinse and repeat, go back to the beginning to phase 1, while, maybe your developers are continuing on a backlog that you've made from phase 3.
Awesome.
Cool.
So you made it through the 3 weeks, and it's week 4 and you finished in quotes. So now what? Well, the first thing first, you actually never really finish. This is a continuous cycle, and we've presented it in a very linear fashion, but as Kristina said, this is happening very cyclically. But the first thing you want to do is celebrate your sprint success. You've completed it, and you really want to start to evangelize the process by advertising your wins. Be your best salesperson, and let those supporting teams know. The marketing teams, the sales teams, what you've accomplished in 3 weeks, and what the next plan is. So celebrating, and this is also really important for your product development team as well. You'll be very focused, really, heads down in those 3 weeks. So coming up for a breath of fresh air and really, patting yourself on the back for what you've accomplished is really important for, team motivation as well. As we said, this isn't a linear process, so you actually could go back and repeat the process in parallel lanes. So, the designer and the product manager might go back to the beginning, and as you'll see in the next bullet, continue to break down the larger problem and revisit your priorities and pick the next valuable slice to kind of start those 3 weeks all over again. The engineers and maybe the designer as well, actually the whole team, will also continue to build and iterate on that problem on that on what you've decided to build. So, this isn't happening in a vacuum, and you want to make sure that you continue with the momentum, continue to build the product, build and eventually ship it. But you want to make sure that those 3 weeks weren't for nothing, and that there's something to be said for after the 3 weeks. Additionally, with continuing the momentum, if you are able to sell it well enough, you could actually get more teams to use the process as well, and help start to break down their problems. That's the model that we use with Crafted. When we come into different clients' offices, we pick one team to really work really closely with, and then when we kind of roll off with them, they're the ones that are going to go and kind of evangelize throughout the company. So showing another product manager the ropes to have them do it with their team, pairing with somebody else, and then ultimately shipping the product. It may not necessarily be at the end of 3 weeks, but you're on a really good track to be able to continuously deliver and iterate. So you should be deploying early and often, and whatever makes sense for you. But don't be afraid of shipping the product. You worked really hard for it. So what are some, we've gone through this several times with a variety of different customers and clients. So we came up with a couple of our tips for success beyond what we've already shared with you. So as we've said repeatedly, this is a big pitfall, but really it's important to commit to the process. Limit your distractions, any outside meetings. For those 3 weeks, you may not be attending your scrums or those types of things, because that hour is really valuable. You could be you could be doing a customer interview, you could be working through a prototype, you could be doing so much in that hour. So really being protective of your time and your kind of what we call deep work, and being really heads down with your team for those 3 weeks. As I said in the beginning, they're gonna look for you, and they're gonna need you consistently, and you're gonna need them. So make sure that you're available. Secondly, keep your meeting audiences efficient. We come into lots of clients, and stand-ups are 50 people large. In these 3 weeks, time is, I can't express to you enough how valuable time is. I mean, it's always valuable, but especially these stand-ups, iteration planning, meetings, retro, keep those audiences tight. We really recommend the balance team, just the working team. There are a variety of different ways to bring in some of your subject matter experts and sales teams and marketing teams and stakeholders in other ways, but whether that's brainstorming sessions or that type of stuff. But you guys have to be as efficient as possible. So making sure that the people in the room are in the room for a reason and will bring something valuable to the meeting is really important. In that same vein, for those people who aren't in all of those meetings, it's important to consistently share out your findings, your next steps. Just keep people involved in what you're doing. A quick email at the end of the day, or a Slack message talking about what you did and what you accomplished, when you're super focused, is going to go a long way, and you're really going to blow away your stakeholders and your supporting teams. They'll also feel like they can then empathize with you on what you're doing and really understand the process, rather than you kind of going into a vacuum or a black box. That's really detrimental to the process. When you kind of close the door, people have a lot of questions. They don't necessarily trust what you're doing. So being as open and as transparent as you can. And as Kristina said, in the variety of different phases, we outlined ways to bring them along and bring in their ideas. They have valuable perspectives as well. So making sure that you're consistently communicating is important. Again, with the technical aspect, we really like to promote developer pairing whenever it's available. If you do have enough developers, and just for a pair, you only need 2. When it's available, we highly recommend that, especially, if you're lucky enough to do a greenfield project, or even, even a normal iteration. developers pairing will help share context build and share foundational knowledge. So, when those pairs are broken through, they both are very comfortable with the POCs that they built, and can kind of use them in a variety of different ways, or help bring along any new developers. So this foundational knowledge is really important, and we find it's the best when it happens the best when developers pair together. And then finally, this one's really important, but it's important to be flexible. It never goes exactly to plan. We do this for a living, and I can tell you it never goes exactly to plan. So, that's why we call the beginning a sketch. Having a sketch is great. It's a good way to kind of have your North Star, but, give yourself some grace, especially the first time you go through it. It's going to be far from perfect. But that's why it's important to, open communication, be really transparent, have retros, and, learn from your mistakes and learn what works for you and your company. And, we tailor this as we learn more and more about our clients as well. So it's not a one size fits all. This isn't a formula. We want to, there's some wiggle room throughout. And then finally, given the environment that we're all in, we wanted to give a nod to adapting for remote work. This is, it's a lot easier to envision when you're, all sitting at a table or in an office together. Remote work adds just another level of complexity. So we recommend starting your sprint with a team norms workshop. So again, these are all on the internet. You can find resources. We're also happy to help direct you. But team norms workshop really set expectations, and as a team together, you decide how you're going to work for the next 3 weeks. So that kind of just sets the tone for the sprint. But then you want to also be vigilant every week about holding your retro. This and holding a good retro, not like a marshmallow fluffy one where people can really get in and talk about what is working, what's not working, what questions they have. This is the way that you hold you and your teams accountable and improve for the next week. So it's, again, incredible what happens from day 1 all the way through day 21. But those retros are crucial for improving on the process. And also holding a retro at the end, just as a whole. That way, again, you can learn from what worked and what didn't, and makes it easier to evangelize with other teams. Keeping communication consistent is really important. Again, going into that black box, any sort of radio silence is, it's tough. And so we recommend being available for pop-up meetings. We're constantly talking in Slack. We are trying to recreate an environment like we would be at if we were all sitting at a desk together or a table together, where I can just quickly pop over and ask my developer a question, whether this may or may not work. Kristina can do the same thing. So everybody's available and is able to quickly and easily communicate. And then finally, finding the tools that work best for the team. Remote, and we have part of one of the silver linings of all of this is that a lot of these tools have evolved for remote work. So we rely heavily on Zoom and Slack, and I know both of those platforms have come a long way since March. But there are definitely tools for pretty much anything that you would normally be able to do in the office. You just have to get creative and maybe do a little research. So you can do remote user testing through different platforms, usertesting.com, Optimal Workshop. I know we use Pendo. You can facilitate a whiteboarding session through, platforms like Miro. I think Google now has their own whiteboarding. So really get creative. And again, a great way to surface what's working, what's not working is in the retros. Or, I wish I was able to just get on the whiteboard and, work with you, and somebody can be like, oh, actually, it may not be in person, but we can do this. So, experimenting with different tools, being open, to what's out there. And, like I said, a lot of this has evolved since March, since remote work is kind of our new reality for the foreseeable future. Okay, I will pause there. We have about 10 minutes left that we'll spend time for addressing Q&A. But you can find us on LinkedIn at Kristina Lins or at Laura Poatsy. We also have a channel in the Colorado product Slack channel. So it's hashtag Get Crafty. I saw a couple questions earlier that people are asking for the slides. We'll be sure to post them there and make them available to you there. And then also our website, crafted.solutions. We have a blog. There's a lot of resources that you can go to there. So without any further ado, I am going to see if we can.
Yeah, so I'll just jump in for a sec, Laura.
Okay.
As Laura said about the Colorado Product Slack, so I've been inviting some people via email to that. If you aren't in it yet, you can chat privately to us if you'd like as well. We can get you in there so that you can see the resources that we post and kind of continue this conversation. I think I have one of the questions that was in the chat here that I think is a really good one for us to answer. So David asked, who manages the process? Is it a member of the balance team, or is there a designated facilitator like in the design sprint? So what we like to do is really approach this as a team. You may not have all of your engineers planning what's happening every week, but we really recommend kind of a end of the day circle up almost every day to make sure that you're on track with your 3 weeks at a glance, this plan that you kind of sketched out. Make sure everyone's on the same page about what do we think we need to do next. Like we said, this isn't a formula. Sometimes you got to play it by ear. But that really is the product designer, the product manager, and probably your lead engineer kind of working together every day to keep things on track. And then, we facilitate sessions kind of depending on what makes the most sense. So typically I'll facilitate a design studio. Laura may facilitate a 2x2 prioritization session and kind of break it down like that. So it really doesn't rely on any one person. It's pretty much a team approach.
Yeah. And just to add on to that too, we are time boxing it into a 3-week product sprint, but really it should, this really should be a springboard. And this is actually how we work all the time. When I was talking about kind of going back and kind of running in parallel lanes, this is really how we kind of just operate. So, not necessarily having a designated facilitator. Yeah, there we go. Like in the design sprint, because that we want this to be as seamless as possible, and really ultimately, like, this 3-week product sprint turns into just how you operate and how you work. So somebody kind of taking time out to be that facilitator makes it more of almost like a ceremony and not necessarily how we work. And we want it to morph into how you work.
Yeah, I think, Laura, I might let you take this one. Is the idea that you only ship at the end of the sprint, or can you separate your release cadence from your sprint schedule?
Yeah, so great question. The answer, of course, is it depends. There are times, depending on the size of the problem that you're breaking down, there are times where you actually will be shipping during the 3-week product sprint. There could be, things that can get shipped and deployed really easily and quickly. Ultimately, if things are time boxed correctly, you want a tangible deliverable at the end of the sprint. So if you can't deliver while you're doing it, which we recommend doing, having something at the end is great. And yeah, we don't always work off of sprint schedules or like a regular delivery cadence. We actually, the way we operate, we use CI/CD. So, we're shipping actually every day, deploying every day, just little increments, slices of value. So that's really what we're aiming for. Obviously, there's ways to mitigate how your user sees big releases and that type of stuff. You can use feature toggles and that type of stuff. But it really just depends. So, do what works, what feels right. But I guess our best advice is to ship as early as you can. Again, that lowers the risk and allows you to kind of iterate a lot quicker on it.
Yeah, and I'll take that and dovetail into another question about how do you avoid stepping on toes, especially sales and marketing people, and how do you involve management in the 3-week sprint? So one of the things that really does help manage these other stakeholders and other teams is delivering early and often. A lot of times these teams have been waiting for something from engineering or from designers for a long time. And so giving them some really quick early wins is a great way to kind of get them on board. I would say, as far as stepping on toes, the more that you can involve them in the process and have these people feel heard, they have great insights. They have lots of really useful knowledge for this process. So bring them to design studios, bring them to brainstorming workshops, test with them internally. We have tested with sales people a lot in the past, even if that's just a paper prototype, and they have great feedback. So I would say the best way to avoid stepping on toes is just to include them as much as possible. And then as far as management goes, we talked about updating your stakeholders as much as you can. I think it depends on who those stakeholders or who those management people are as far as when and where you include them in the process. We are all familiar with the swoop and poop that we like to joke about, but the more that they're informed, the less likely they are to try to run in and kind of take things over or redirect you or whatever. If you're really showing them what you're accomplishing every few days or at least every week, they'll feel a lot more involved in the process that way. Anything else, Laura?
Yeah, it looks like we have 2 other questions on the Q&A piece. So Amy's asking, can you share suggestions for how to sell stakeholders on this process for the first 3-week product sprint? So that is something that we are up against all the time. And it may take a little bit depending on your sponsor stakeholder. It could take a good chunk of time to get them on board. This is kind of inspired from the Google Design Sprint. So there's a lot of clout around that that is able to be built upon, but to just break it, do what we do with product, break it down into smaller sections. So if you don't operate in balanced teams yet, ask or try and figure out a way that you can create your first balanced team and just start working together as a balanced team, and start to show those efficiencies that's a great way to do it. You also can kind of informally do this as well, where you're kind of going through the process, and then you can kind of retroactively talk to them about it so that you can then get more buy-in and more resources and time and that type of stuff for a bigger problem. So start small, walk or crawl before you walk before you run, and really just find different small wins throughout this deck you can, like we said, celebrate those wins and those successes and show how that is leading you towards this bigger picture. Finally, Kristina, I'll let you handle this one. Haley, we have about 1 minute left. Haley's asking, how often do the designers check in with the developers?
That's a really good question. This is something that we see teams struggle with all the time, is waiting too long to involve the developers. I would say immediately.
Yeah,
bring in engineers to the sketching sessions. Like I said, it doesn't need to be a lot of pressure around what you're drawing. Most of our engineers will just write out some ideas of development solutions. So it's a great way to get them started thinking about it as early as you're thinking about it. You're all kind of doing that together. And then I show them every time I go through an iteration. I set up just maybe a quick 30 minutes, maybe it's not even that long, kind of depends on how big the prototype is and how many changes. But I'll set that up, every couple of days. The other great thing about doing that is it really pushes the team. You should be working quickly to the point where you kind of feel uncomfortable with how quickly you're moving and how many designs that you're producing. But yeah, the earlier and the more often that you bring them along, obviously it'll also make your life easier, that you're not going to, you know, end up with a huge backlog and then tons of questions. Like, you're trying to move on to the next thing. They're really ready and set to go on the thing that you just delivered to them.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll turn it back over to Denver Startup Week.